Hi, this is Tammy Leisher, host of Embracing Change, Talking Through Trauma. The podcast is focused on fitness enthusiasts and movement educators, where we'll have deep conversations that are impacting the movement industry. For example, trauma, health, vitality, the nervous system, and movement. And now, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Embracing Change, Talking Through Trauma. And today my guest is DK Ciccone, and she lives in Boston, Massachusetts. And she has a Pilates studio, which is right behind her. So she's a Pilates instructor. She also is an author, and I hope this is going to come up clear. But the name of her book is entitled You're Meant to Move, A Guide to Conquering Chronic Pain, Increasing Stress and Resilience, and Reclaiming an Active Life. Welcome, DK. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's definitely a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you. So last week, off camera, you and I had a conversation around loss and grief and loss. And I just want to acknowledge that you lost a pet of 12 and a half years.
Mm-hmm.
And I also lost pet, and I had him for a little over 11 years.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And when you think about and so oftentimes, we think about grief and we think about it more from the adult standpoint, like from a person standpoint, not necessarily from pet standpoint. And through my research, I have found that sometimes pet loss can be even more deeply rooted in who we are from regards to transitions and things like that, or transitions, routine, and all kinds of things like that. And I think it's really important that we honor people who have lost pets because they are a part of our family, correct?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say that your kitty was?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. But the pain of it, and when I picked up your book for the second time, I mean, I've had your book, but I picked it up again because I was just like, I have clients who have gone through loss and chronic pain, and I got to thinking about just the connection between loss and chronic pain, and how you wrote in your book about the nurse, correct?
Yes.
And she was the one that started you on your journey, because when you think about losing part of you due to an accident,
Mm-hmm.
it can take people into deep depression.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Can you talk a little bit about how she propelled you to do the work you're doing now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was already a Pilates teacher at that time. I mean, that's how we met. She came for Pilates, and in her case, she had been hit by a car in a crosswalk, and had multiple surgeries, eventually a knee replacement, and was also had like a traumatic brain injury, broken clavicle, some other upper body things, and then started having complex regional pain syndrome in her lower leg. And for folks who may not be familiar with that, it's really a condition that is not, we don't really fully understand how to treat. We don't have like a great way to treat it, although there's a lot of folks who are doing groundbreaking work related to the nervous system. But it's when the body basically experiences usually a very large, significant trauma and kind of consistently sends out pain signals, sometimes consistently sends out pain and inflammation signals as well, to an area of the body that doesn't require that for healing. It's like it's stuck in overdrive. Like, I'm trying to heal it, I'm trying to heal it, I'm trying to heal it, and then, but there's nothing that needs it. And so it's very, very painful. Folks will wake up and be in pain all day. But what was really special about this particular client is that while I had been helping people with movement, I mean, even in my own body, helping myself move, I found a remedy, or at least a means of coping with my pain. This was the first person who was willing to be vulnerable enough to kind of share the full spectrum of emotions that she was experiencing related to her pain. And there were days that she would come in, we saw each other twice a week, and there were days she would come in and we would move very little because she was either just in so much pain or, feeling the emotional burden of having had to say goodbye to her career as a nurse because she could no longer perform it. And, there was sort of some interpersonal dynamics because the person that was with her when she was hit, I think there was just some tension there, sort of like guilt probably of kind of like, why did I ask you to cross the street? I mean, I don't know about you. My husband and I fight about crossing the street almost all the time because he wants to jump in front of cars. So I think there was also an interpersonal thing going on. Um, and then sort of, the fear of like, is this the new normal? Like, am I ever going to be able to experience the joy of being in my body again? Like, has it just been stolen from me? And so she was like the first person who really articulated all those things, shed the tears associated with it. And as we were kind of working through movement and these things were coming up as a result of movement, right? Movement can be sort of a pathway into feelings that we've bottled up. I've definitely
Absolutely.
had that happen to me. I've been in like yoga classes and all of a sudden I'm like, like
Yeah.
crying.
Yeah.
So sometimes movement gets it going. And that's when I started to realize like, okay, there's a lot more going on here than just movement. Like there's a service that I'm providing that is about creating safe space
Yeah.
for processing. Cause like the processing of those feelings and kind of acknowledging the grief of that you're feeling, acknowledging the lack of safety that is now systemic in you, right? Like your nervous system has decided that the world is a fundamentally unsafe place and it's in hyper panic mode. Like
Yep.
being able to process all that stuff alongside the movement, not separate from it, like in a sterile like therapist office, but sort of as you're going through the feeling of trying to use your legs again, I just started to see how really powerful that was. And so
Mhm.
that's when I really was like, okay, I want to create, because at the time I was inside a very fitness oriented facility. And so it wasn't always possible to have those kind of profound breakthroughs in that kind of environment. I'm like, I want to build a space that's just for this. And I want to give it a name because there's no name for that. I'm still kind of figuring out what to call it. I guess movement remedies is sort of where we are, but there's like it's a specific way of doing movement in a therapeutic way. I think certainly very close, I'm sure, to the kind of work that you do.
Trauma informed.
Um, yeah, so there's sort of like movement plus something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
It's much faster and it's more efficient to see one person who can kind of hold space for both of those things than to try to like process the trauma and your feelings in one room and then try to pretend like you're not having any feelings when you
Mhm.
use resistance for the first time on your new leg or your new knee joint. You know what I mean? So that was where I really just started to be like, mostly I dove into research at that point because I'm like, I don't even know what I'm seeing, right?
Yeah. It's really interesting because many, many years ago, my mother-in-law, who I was extremely close to, was in a horrific car accident, and ultimately the accident ended up having her. She was an above the knee amputee, and I saw
Oh,
how she. I mean, we're talking. This was DK. This was a very, very long time ago, but it was so powerful for me to watch her because of the amount of like phantom pain, the amount of like even pain to learn how to rewalk again, the amount of for her, she suffered a lot of um body dysmorphia because of the amputation, but she
hmm.
was a very, very active lady prior to her accident. And it whittled away at her self-esteem. I mean, there was a multitude of things. So I can understand, but to me, when I put that connection back to like thinking about her, we're talking, this was a long time. I mean, I was teaching yoga at that point, but not what I'm doing now on that kind of a level. But when you see people who have experienced horrific accidents like that and how the traumas impact her body, in so many different levels. And I know, and I'm just going to say it for everybody, is we're both working within the scope of our practice. Neither one of us are counselors, so we're
Right.
working within the scope of our practice, and holding space for people and the language that we use is just so critically important. And I
Yeah, I
think that,
think it's good that you call that out because certainly if somebody presents with like, a really serious emotional mental thing, I will refer them to address that with a clinician. But I mean, in the space of movement, it's just about like letting the person feel that they're safe to express what they're feeling and also kind of validating um that they're performing the movement successfully despite the fear that's coming up.
yes. And I think too, sometimes just even because I'm sure you've heard like maybe what their trauma was, but it's like just acknowledging that they've experienced a trauma that's impacted their body, not to go in depth with it, but just even to acknowledge it, because I think it's so important that it's acknowledged, because so oftentimes when people have gone through chronic stress or trauma or childhood trauma, people don't recognize it, or they don't, I'm going to just say honor it. Um, and it can be really hard.
And I think it was what's really natural to focus on like what's not the same or what's not progressing at a rate that you want. And we very quickly forget how far we've come. So I think also just acknowledging like I hear what you're saying and this one's taking a longer time, this squat or whatever, this lunge is taking longer, but look at how incredibly well you're standing on one leg, or look at how far you've come walking. You walked it here unaided today without your walker or whatever it is. I think we have to be, as movement coaches, like one of the most powerful things we can do is be that mirror that like filters out the things that they're focusing on, which are negative, and project back just the reality of how far they've come.
And I'm just gonna I currently have a client that I've worked with her probably over 2 years now. And when she first started coming to me, she walked with a cane,
Mm,
and she doesn't use her cane anymore. And to me, to see, and that was one of her goals, and
yep.
I know, and to me, movement goals, I don't care if you're a fully able-bodied person or when you're coming with, pain, but having attainable goals or even attempting to break them down to make them be attainable is so critically important as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that, just like, you know, I treat everyone equally the same when they come to my studio, whether they're coming to me for trauma-informed movement or they're coming to me for athletic type Pilates. And I think it's really important to honor people where they are on their journeys for movement. And I know you feel the same way. Um,
Hmm.
so
Yeah, I mean, I don't take anything for granted either. To your point about goals, I mean, that's one of the kind of main tenets of that book is let's stop letting other people tell us what healthy looks like and what like a beneficial movement practice looks like. A beneficial movement practice is the one that helps you do life.
yeah.
So that could be any number of things. And I think, also, especially based, I was telling you when we last spoke about, I recently had the great pleasure of attending the Trauma Research Foundation conference. Much of the content was way over my head, but a lot of the bits I went to, which were really interesting, they talked about rates of like incidents of trauma being as high as 90 to 90% of the population, like depending on how you define it. There's like some granularity, but I think the lowest was like 40. It was like 40 to 90. So I mean, I think to your point, you could probably assume almost everybody walking through your doors has had trauma of some kind. And there's
Oh,
something.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, um, thank you for bringing that up, because to me, that's why I do the work that I do, is to bring awareness
Hmm.
to the fitness industry, um, that trauma could be, I mean, it's how everybody perceives it as well. So, like how you were impacted by trauma and how I was impacted by there, it's very individualized in
Yes.
the way our
Yes.
bodies and it's the way our bodies perceive it, and that's the way our bodies process it or don't process it. So, and I think that's really, really important. But I also think that when you look at the different kinds of trauma there are, and there's a wide spectrum of them, um, from childhood trauma to emotional trauma to physical trauma to chronic brain injuries to PTSD. I mean, there's a whole variety of things, and they're going to be varying levels of how people are going to process moving through them. And there's all different kinds of treatment options for people. So so therapy. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in addition to talk therapy, lots of things. So,
Mhm.
but so when you went to that conference, you said it was over your head, but obviously you walked away with some information that made you go, aha.
Yeah, I mean, I like immersing myself in environments like that because I feel like even if a good chunk of it is super technical and I feel like I'm still
Yeah.
absorbing useful things. And you know, I've always been someone who feels really energized by environments like that anyway, just being around people who have ideas to share and being able to like pour into my own learning. But what was really exciting about the conference and part of why I decided to go, apart from the fact that trauma comes up with pain a lot, is they had several sessions that were related to movement. And there was one session that was specifically talking about yoga, and it was taught by a person in a wheelchair who had lost the use of their legs after a childhood accident. And that was a phenomenal experience. And then there was also another session where people worked with children, and they used all different kinds of they're essentially toys, but they were like large bouncy things um, to help children. They would kind of regulate their nervous system by
That's
having to
exactly what they were
stabilize
doing.
themselves.
Yep.
And it
Yep.
was so cool. And we got to use it too, right? So like
Yeah.
it was during the cocktail hour. I don't know whose idea that was, but we were rolling around on these things and they were so calming and comforting. And I've used even that, I mean, I've heard that before about like rocking and how that soothes the nervous
Yeah.
system, but I do try to incorporate rocking and those kinds of movements into my
Mhm.
classes even because like let's be honest, even if you're not a person who experiences chronic pain or has, a history of trauma, like the world around us is so stimulating. Like it's actually really difficult to find a place where we can kind of soothe the nervous system. So I really try to make my movement experience for everybody involve something that helps to soothe their nervous system and then also
Yeah.
tell them why I'm doing it so
Yeah.
that people can go home and be like, "Oh, I'm gonna rock," and it's
Well,
great.
and you don't, I mean, I have a very, like, my understanding of the nervous system is very scientific, and I use it in every session with my clients. But rocking and like using like the large balls to sit on, or I'm in a chair that can rock side to side, those kinds of things are calming, but it's also connected to the brain, and there's so many other things that go along with it. But
Sure.
so my background, DK is actually started in early childhood education, and I worked with young children long, long time ago when Stephen Porges first wrote the polyvagal theory. So we're talking in the late 90s. And so like things like drumming and the beat, the rhythmic of the
Mm,
drum, when you tie it back to like the Native Americans and the drums, drumming
mhm,
can be really, really calming for children as well as adults.
mhm.
So, but not that you're going to use that in your studio, but I think that it's the world around us. You used it's very stimulating, but it's also very dysregulating for our nervous system, and we don't even sometimes realize what's going on in our body. And when we're always in constant flight, which is like when you think about your client who was in chronic pain, her nervous system was always in overdrive, and I'm sure that she displayed like all kinds of things. Um, through her breath, through movement, through was your body really tight and tense?
I mean, everybody who comes to see me usually has a dysregulated nervous system. So,
Exactly.
I notice it from maybe their tightness, maybe the fact that, yeah, they're either holding their breath or taking really short breaths.
Yep.
Um, maybe sometimes there's like kind of almost anger that like
Yep.
outbursts, I notice that as well. Um, Yeah, and I mean, again, like I said, I just think we all benefit from it. I mean, I don't specifically use things like tapping or simulation in my
No,
classes,
I don't.
but
I
I've
don't
had
yet.
workshops. I've had workshops here that teach that because like I do think that it's great that we're getting some of these regulating tools like um more into the world. I did actually was on a podcast really recently where she was saying that, sometimes it's frustrating because it kind of feels like with all these tools now becoming available and like widely known, it's like, go manage your nervous system on your own time. So like we still haven't figured out in our society how to also make space for people
Yep.
to use the tools instead of just being like, now you have another thing to do. You should also do your meditation, your tapping, and your visualization like before you start your workday. So we need to get it back like into our daily culture. And grief is a really great example of this because I mean, you mentioned Native American and other indigenous cultures have lots of rhythmic instruments. They also had lots of really um meaningful and rituals around grieving.
Yes, they
Like you would
did.
have never had someone pass and just go back to the hunting party or whatever, right? I mean, like, we would take days and have various rituals around honoring that person and we all of that has gone away and then I think it's been to our detriment. So I think there's like a lot of these things that actually need to come back into the fabric of our daily life, but we need to figure out how to make it mesh with profit and I think no one's figured that out yet.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting because also like when you look at like how our nervous system plays a part in, I mean, there's no part of our life that that like you got your home nervous system and you've got your work nervous system. You can't separate them. And
No.
so even things in how our nervous system impacts our ability to make decisions, to think clearly, to, be focused like with your eyes and things like that. There's so many things that people don't even realize that are impacting their ability to work profitably. And those are
100%.
yeah, yeah, and there's and those are things that we don't necessarily like people pleasing. I mean, those things are curie. You might learn it as a child, but you're going to take it into a work setting and then, or let's see, lack of boundaries would be another really good example
Hmm.
in a work
Hmm.
setting, and all of those things kind of manifest into like whether you're in let's just say a professional office environment or you're teaching in a studio. Like, I mean, so, I mean, it's really, to me, the fabric of trauma, it infiltrates in all areas of our lives. And in my own opinion, this is just my opinion, that businesses as well as individuals all need to be trauma informed
Oh yeah.
and have a better understanding of how it impacts on so many different levels.
Well,
So,
I mean, if you think about the fact that if you're a manager of people in a corporate environment and you can't understand or see the signs of um, you know, a someone who's struggling with trauma. I mean, if you think of the ways in which like certain experiences at work could also be sort of triggering for,
yes.
in some way and we could be sort of re-traumatizing people. I mean, the whole like power dynamics of a corporate environment for certain kinds of trauma are also just really problematic, right? Where you have this like authority figure that you feel like you can't like speak to, and you're kind of, if you had any kind of childhood. I mean, there's just like so much about the corporate setup that just is, I agree with you, is just really it's not conducive to helping people thrive. if they fundamentally are in a state of mind where they believe that the world is unsafe and that there are certain
Correct.
aspects that feel unsafe. So, yeah.
But sometimes I'm also gonna say that, the people at the top are the it has to start sometimes just acknowledging themselves that they've gone through trauma and acknowledging that, and when you can look at, like, and it's hard work. I mean, like, dealing with your own baggage is not it can be hard work, but sometimes just even acknowledging that, their patterns are rooted in their past traumas.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and I think that, um going back to your book and how you've tied in so many different things from, like, movement and the nervous system. And I know you said you haven't, I mean, I think your comment to me was is you've never been officially trained in trauma, and you still had a really good understanding of it, just like you do a really good understanding of the nervous system. And I think that's really credible to intertwine and weave it into your studio working with your clients. And um, I think it's important, and I want to first of all say thank you for doing the work that you're doing because it's important. Um, but I think that, for and again, this podcast is not just for studio owners or I mean, I want it to be to everybody as well, but having a better understanding how chronic pain and loss and our nervous system, it all intertwines. We we're all interconnected. Everything, even our conversation that we're having here, and we're how many miles away from each other? So
Yeah.
long way.
It's funny. Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, I remember when I first got my certification and, people were saying, well, this is just the beginning of your education, right? This is just it feels like the end because you're like, oh, I did my 500 hours or whatever. And I mean, I really resonate with that because, I went down this path. Other people go down different paths. They, become like the prenatal expert or the osteoporosis expert or whatever. And this was the path that intrigued me. And I mean, if there are Pilates teachers listening, if you're early in your career, I would say like take heart in the fact that like there's a path for you and like just infusing whatever excites you into your work, into your learning journey as a teacher, like of any kind of movement, I think can only enhance the value of what you bring to clients because everybody needs something different. So I
Exactly.
think it's really exciting the ways in which we have the ability to explore the whole world and what's available to us and, in the scientific research and then build that into the way that we then see the clients that are in front of us.
And for me, I've I've infused it because of my, like, from teaching at the college level and teaching about trauma and working with children and families around trauma. It's just kind of like evolved. But I mean, I wouldn't be doing this work too if I had not, I don't want to use the
Right.
word trauma has been very much taught me. I mean, even though I've had gone through trauma, but it's also been a teaching tool for me as well. And I think that there's a book that I've really it's an education book, but the author's name is Parker J. Palmer, and he says that we teach what we need to learn. So,
Yes. Oh, I
and
agree
I
with
think that
that.
is so powerful that, it's really like that quote in itself has resonated with me on so many different levels. If there's an area of, like, or like you talk about research, and I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm definitely a research junkie. If you could only see my books behind the behind the camera, I have lots of them, and you know, I am stepping outside my comfort zone in a few weeks, and I'm actually going to attend, um, a conference. It's actually a mental health conference, and the title of the conference is called Emotions Need Motion.
Ooh, I love
And
that.
it's an
Actually, I feel
international,
like I saw that. I feel like I saw that online somewhere.
yeah, and it's going to be in Heartland, Wisconsin. So it's probably like I'm gonna take like between I live in Michigan, so there's a ferry that connects the west side of Michigan to the east side of Wisconsin, and I'm going to take it's called the Badger. So I'm gonna take
Oh,
the
fun.
Badger and go over. I'm really excited about it because there's actually people that are exercise physiologists. Like it's science driven, and it's like the idea of going and being in an environment where I can learn from different people, and it's not just about Pilates, but how does it infuse in so many different levels? So
I'm so
I'm
glad that they're starting to talk about movement in all these other venues. I
modalities.
mean, it's
Yeah.
important because I mean, movement is just fundamental to human experience, right? We are a locomotive kind of
Well,
species.
and your book has a beautiful title. You're meant to move. I mean, that, there we go. I just feel it's something that like how you have like there's a mountain on the front of it, and to me, it's like when you think about emotions, and if you think about that being a mountain, or it could even be a volcano, and if you've got emotions that are buried in the lava down below, and then it starts to erupt, motion helps process all of that.
Mm.
And it's I love I don't know how you came up with the cover, but I just really like the cover because it for me it resonated on so many different levels because it looks like there possibly could even be um, peaks of ice when you think about like ice and experiencing with emotions because how many people numb their emotions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always, my grandmother had a big influence on me, and she used to always talk about how like life is about the path to Ithaca or the journey. It's like an old poem, but and I think that's part of what speaks to me about that cover and about just the work that I do in general, which is I think I used to always give myself a really hard time that whatever moment I was in at that moment, whatever version of myself I was in at that moment wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't tough enough. And sort of, beating myself up about it as opposed to just accepting that like I'm in a journey and the possibilities are endless. And that is like the hope and the magic of the body because both the brain and the body are capable of learning new things and adapting until you take your last breath. And so there's a big mountain in front of us and we don't know what it holds, what and it, or how far we'll get, or if there'll be many mountains beyond it, right? It's just sort of like trying to let the mystery of that excite us about what we can learn about ourselves and what that can teach us about living a full life as opposed to just seeing the pain as a wall that stops us from
Yes.
moving forward.
Mhm. Or what about the taking the mask off and living authentically?
Yes. Well,
And
yes.
when we mask our pain, whether it's emotional pain or physical pain, it's still there. And when you can begin to show up authentically and talk about things that are part of the the inner webbings of our body
Hmm.
and what makes us who we are from our chronic pain, from our past traumas, from our like like from our like loved ones who passed away and the things I mean when you have unresolved issues they get buried in that mountain like
Yes.
and it's
That's
just
true.
it's processing whether you're processing physically or with a therapist, which both have, to me, they're both equally important. Talk therapy as well as like motion. I mean, but I'm going to tell you that one of my friends said to me that emotions have no timeline. So they can come up. If it was something that happened to you as a child and it's still down there buried, it's just like, and it's gonna unearth itself someday.
Hmm.
Just you don't know how. It might be pain, it might be lung issues. I mean, I'm just using those as examples, but I think that processing and moving our bodies in whatever modality that may be, and I'm not just talking about Pilates, it could be Pilates and yoga. It might even just be walking, doing. Bilateral movements and walking helps process our emotion, especially grief.
Mm.
And so, DK, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a
My pleasure.
pleasure. And I I know you're going to be moving, but I still look forward to having other conversations with you when you move.
Yes, I'll have
So,
new
I'm
exciting
too,
things to share, I hope.
yes, exactly. So, um, thank you. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. It's my lifelong mission to educate and bring awareness to the fitness industry around trauma-informed movement. If you have any questions or subject that you would like to hear addressed, reach out to me at my website at www.studiotpilates.com. Hit that subscribe button so the next time we release our latest episode, you're going to be notified. You can also reach out to me on Facebook at Tammy Leisher. On Instagram, you can also reach out to me at Tammy Leisher, but also Studio T Pilates MI. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and we'll talk to you next time.